we live in a world in decline. There are lots of signs that the world is in decline. So you have conflict and wars. You look at the situation in Ukraine. Look at the situation in the Middle East. Conflicts are rising in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Myanmar. Okay, so we live in a world of conflict. And that tells us that the world is in decline. What are some other signs? So you have climate change. Okay, we are putting too much pressure on the environment. So the air, the water, the land is becoming much more toxic. What else? Unemployment is going up. But not only that, but people's attitude towards work is declining. We live in an age when people don't take work that seriously. We call this in China the 摆烂, meaning let it rot, like who cares? In America, the term is called quiet quitting. Okay, you pretend to work, but you're not really working. What are some other signs? So also you have lower birth rate. And this is a very important sign, right? Because if you think about it, if young people refuse to get married and have babies, eventually the world is going to die off, right? And we're seeing this happen throughout the entire world in all societies. Okay, you see a lower standard of living. Okay? And all this means is that inflation, right? Prices go up, but people's wages go down. So that's another sign of decline. You also see higher stress, right? People feel more anxious. People feel more depressed. People feel more stressed. Emotionally, they feel drained. Okay? People are less optimistic, right? Also, and this is really important, is the idea of debt, both public and private. There are lots of governments around the world that are facing a fiscal crisis. A fiscal crisis just means that they spend more than they take in tax revenue. There are many families in China, in the United States, throughout the world that are heavily in debt. Also, lower cohesion and trust. And what this means is that people no longer trust each other as they did before. If you walk on the street and you see a man on the street bleeding or hurt, you're less likely to help him. So lower trust issues, okay? Increase in disease. People are less healthy than before. People are more stressed than before. So we can go on and on and on because the signs of rapid social decline are too many. Also, another sign of decline that's very important, immigration. But immigration is a sign of decline because it reduces cohesion, okay? And it also reduces the standard of living. Another sign of decline is also housing prices. People can no longer afford to buy a house. This is true in China. Young people can no longer afford to buy a house, but it's also true throughout the world, okay? It's really hard for young people to get by. Also, fiscal crisis, right? We talked about this, but the idea of fiscal crisis is the government cannot afford a lot of public expenditures. 5-10 years from now, pension will be a huge problem for governments. All right, now having done this, what I'm going to do now is go over some theories as to why this is happening. The first is the idea of financialization. And this theory is proposed by an economist, a French economist named Thomas Piketty. And he wrote a book called Capital. And what he argues is that what happens in society is that capitalism transitions from phase to phase to phase. In the beginning, you have consumer capitalism, meaning that what the society is trying to do is create goods that consumers want to buy. This is an era of rapid wealth generation. Then you move into financial capitalism, which is a period of investment. Rather than build factories, you put the money into the stock market. So you're trying to generate as much money as possible. So in the first phase, consumer capitalism, you focus on the generation of wealth. In financial capitalism, you focus on the generation of money. And then you move on to monopoly capitalism, which is where just a few companies control everything. And we live in an era of monopoly capitalism. And this happens because it is much more profitable for companies to be monopolies than to be in competition with each other. And that's the age we live in today. Okay? Now, why is this important? It's important because when we make this transition, people are no longer focused on working hard. They're only focused on speculating. So let me give you an example. Let's just say I'm an entrepreneur and I want to make as much money as possible. What I do is I build a factory. When I build a factory, I'm creating real wealth because a factory requires you to hire workers. It requires you to build technology. It requires you to build goods that people want to buy. But after I build a factory and I make a lot of money, I want to take this money and let it grow as fast as possible, so I put it in a stock market. And that's just how people behave. The problem is that if too many people do that, then no one's really working. No one's creating real wealth in the economy. The other problem is that because of the way capitalism is set up, if everyone's putting the money in the stock market grows too fast. And the real economy does not grow that fast, okay? And the difference is stark. Thomas Piketty spent a lot of time going over income tax, just looking at how much tax people paid. He did a lot of statistical analysis. And what he discovered is the real economy in late-stage capitalism will grow about 2%. The financial economy will grow at 5%. And this is really key. What this is telling us is that if you have $1 million, you could choose to go and open a restaurant, or you could choose to invest in the stock market. If you open a restaurant, you will make at most $20,000 a year. But if you were to put in the stock market, you would make $50,000 a year. So everyone's going to put all the money in the stock market, which allows for the stock market to increase. But the real economy is not improving. And therefore, you have all these issues arise. Greater unemployment, greater debt. So that's the idea of financialization. And what Piketty argues is that this is just a natural byproduct of capitalism. We live in an age of late-stage capitalism. Let's move on to the second theory called elite overproduction. And this was proposed by a historian named Peter Turchin. And Peter Turchin spent decades looking at why societies rise and fall. He looked at the Roman Empire. He looked at the French Revolution. And what he believed is societies fall because of the idea of elite overproduction, meaning you have too many powerful people competing for limited positions of power. So to understand this, I'm going to talk about another experiment called Rat Utopia. And Rat Utopia was a series of experiments conducted by an American scientist named James B. Calhoun. And what James Calhoun was trying to do in his experiments was trying to figure out what living in a world of abundance and wealth and security meant. After World War II, the world was divided between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was the Cold War. But it was also a time of increasing abundance due to technology and peace. And the population was increasing. So James Calhoun conducted these experiments to figure out what this meant for the world. So what he did was this. He had a room that was sealed off from the world. And in the room, he put in food and water and housing for a colony of rats. maybe like 10 rats at first, but they quickly became 400, 500 rats. At first, the rats were really happy. But no matter how Calhoun configured the experiment, ultimately, the rats always ended up killing each other. So what he discovered is, if you live in a world of abundance and security, the end result is the rats always kill each other. He kept on doing this for 20 years, and he could never, ever create a situation in which the rats lived peacefully, and he could never figure out why this was the case. And even today, there's a huge debate as to why this is the case. But he had a theory, okay? And the theory is this. The rats were not competing for food. They were really competing for status. Let's think about this, okay? In the real world, rats compete each other for mating rights, right? So you see a beautiful rat and you fight over her, right? The rat who wins out is now the alpha male. And the alpha male can have as many female companions as he wants. And what do the other rats do? In nature, what will the other rats do? Well, the other rats will probably run away, go somewhere else, and find other female companions, right? Because everyone's trying to be the alpha male. What's the problem with James Calhoun's experiment? Why do they fight each other? There's no place for them to go. They're stuck where they are. So status is what we call a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. Okay? There can only be one winner. But in nature, if I win, then the other rats run away and try to build their own colony. But in James Calhoun's experiment, there's no place for them to go. And so all that happens is they keep on fighting each other until they die. Okay? And that's the idea of elite overproduction. The elite, the children of the elite, are always fighting for positions of power. But eventually have too many children and there are not enough positions of power. Another way of saying this is that in China today, there are too many graduates of Peking University, Beida, and Tsinghua University, Tsinghua, right? They want to be the big boss, but there's too many of them. There's no place for them to go. And that leads to conflict in society. And ultimately, what Peter Turchin has discovered is, if that's the case, then elite overproduction will ultimately lead to either war or revolution. It will lead to the collapse of society. And there's no way around this. Now I want to go to the third theory. And the third theory is the idea of a civilizational life cycle. And this is proposed by a German philosopher, scholar named Oswald Spengler. And what he argues is that society, culture, civilization, it's no different from a person. As a person, as a human being, we go through a life cycle. We are born, we grow up, we mature, then we die. And there's no way around this. We all have limited life cycles. And what Oswald Spengler says is that happens in society as well. And there's nothing anyone can do about this. So let's go over the life cycle for civilization, okay? In the beginning, you are in the village. Then you move to the town. Then you move to the city. Then you develop the megacity. Not all civilizations will go through the cycle, but the successful ones will go through the cycle. And what Oswald Spengler says is, at the height of the civilization must now die. Well, in the village, life is pretty simple. People work hard, they are united, they have a collective mentality. Lots of babies, right? Okay, so this is the framework of a village. But as you go up the civilization ladder, as you mature as a civilization, what happens is you have increased abstraction. Abstraction is just a fancy word for you're removed from reality. So when you're in a village, you understand everything, right? You understand, oh, the food that I eat comes from the seeds I implant. But when you're in a city, those drinks you're drinking, you have no idea where it comes from. The food you're eating, you have no idea where it comes from. It's all abstract to you. It's all removed from reality. In the village, people are engaged in working hard and in helping each other. But as you move up, people become much more individualistic, right? You're concerned about your own personal pleasure. In a village, what keeps people together are emotions and tradition. But when you move to a megacity, what is it that holds people together? It's money. Money is the greatest abstraction. It means we don't have to ever trust each other. In a village, if you get sick, everyone comes and helps you, right? But in the city, if you get sick, you go to the hospital and pay the doctor. Your neighbors don't have to care, okay? So you become individualized. In the megacity, what happens is because you are concerned only about your own individual pleasure, you don't work hard anymore. In fact, what you want to do is you want immigrants to work for you. And guess what, guys? You don't want to have any children. And that's why the megacity represents the death of civilization. Okay? And that's why we have these trends.